Welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, we look at Andy Burnham's proposals for fixing the care system. Zack Polanski has refused to apologise for sharing that image of a T-shirt involving Nigel Farage. And we speak to the party's Manchester Mayoral candidate before tomorrow's crunch by-election. Plus, FIFA President Gianni Infantino plans to sell off the sport to the highest bidder, and AI companies are begging to be regulated. How cynical should we be? I'm Michael Walker. I'm joined by Aaron Bastani. Aaron, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling great, Michael. Look, it wouldn't be Wednesday if we weren't talking about AI.
Exactly. But I have a guest for this section, so actually you're off the hook. I'm speaking to Garrison Lovely, a fantastic name, someone who's got a new book on AI coming out soon, from quite a popular interview on Breaking Points, in fact.
Right. Well, I've got a lot to say. I've got a lot of yapping to do about social care and Gianni Infantino. So that's probably for the best.
Perfect. If you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. You can also listen to the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And don't forget to let us know what you think in the comments below. Andy Burnham has been on a decades-long mission to fix social care. In 2009, as Health Secretary, he proposed a national care service along the lines of a national health service funded by a 10% tax on estates, obviously to be paid when people pass away. Now, back then, the right-wing press labelled it a death tax, and it never happened. Obviously, Labour lost the next general election. However, as Prime Minister, Andy Burnham is having a go again. Today, he gave a press conference in a care home where he announced that Louise Casey's review into social care would be brought forward a year. He also said he would launch cross-party talks on care, and he suggested that he was still committed to some form of national care service. And he made this personal plea.
I am making this a test of myself, whether I can bring forward a solution, and that is what I want to do. I would never forgive myself, ever. Who knows how long I will be in this position, but as long as I am, I will do my best to find a solution. And I would never forgive myself if I left without having tried, because of the headlines that will inevitably appear and some of the efforts that some people will make to create scare stories about the whole issue. Well, you can't create scare stories when people are already scared by what they're seeing anyway, through their own eyes, in their own homes or in care homes. You can't create scare stories for the staff when they're kind of living the life that they have to live. They kind of see it anyway. And, you know, you can have as many headlines as you like about this tax or something else, but when people are losing hundreds of thousands of pounds, everything they've worked for, well, what about them?
That was Andy Burnham sort of preemptively pushing back against the attacks that get thrown at any new tax-raising proposal to fund social care. He's saying we're already in crisis and people are already losing their money. Now, to remind you briefly how the current system works, social care, of course, unlike the NHS, it's not free at the point of use. For everyone with over £23,000 worth in assets, social care is paid for out of their own pocket. So lots of people that get dementia, they have to sell their family home. For anyone with fewer assets, it's paid for principally by local authorities who themselves are very cash strapped. Now, this all means that social care is overall underfunded. There's also, of course, a massive lottery as to what people can pass down to their kids. So if you've earned money all your life to get this house that you want to pass down to your kids, if you don't get dementia, there's going to be very little inheritance tax on it. Inheritance tax is tiny in this country. If you get dementia, it might all get eaten up to pay for your care. Andy Burnham currently won't commit to details about his vision for care or how it would be funded. He says he's waiting for the Casey review and these cross-party talks, which he's just launched. There are some potential ideas being briefed in the papers, though. The Telegraph report that civil servants are drawing up an option for a new tax on workers to fund social care. So they say this, the options drawn up by the Department for Health and Social Care include a new levy on income, which could be set at 1.8% of earnings above £6,240, paid by workers over the age of 34. Unlike national insurance, which funds current government spending, the fund would be invested on behalf of working age people to use for the cost of care when their cohort reaches old age. The fund would be supplemented by wealthier elderly people who, on top of paying the new levy, would pay for between 10 and 45% of their own costs, depending on the value of their assets. So that's a mixed system. So taxes from workers, plus co-payments from those with assets. So a bit of both. People pay for some of their care and the rest is from taxation. Now, obviously, I think a neater option is just the 10% estates tax, right? So that's not any more tax on people's work. I already think that the fact that inheritance tax is so low is an injustice. There is a lot of money tied up in people's homes. I don't think it makes sense, given that it is for people later in life, to say it should be tied up to the wealth in your house. However, this was labelled a death tax last time, which is why potentially sort of Burnham doesn't want to commit to it now. However, opposition politicians are already sort of saying that this is the big threat from Labour. This was Robert Jenrick, probably the most cynical man in British politics, speaking to Good Morning Britain.
No one is certain that this is going to be suggested, but the idea of a 10% inheritance tax, why are you so dead against it?
Our concern at Reform is that in the past, and as you rightly say, we don't know what Andy Burnham's going to propose today, but in the past, in fact, over about 20 years, he's been an advocate of a plan whereby people would pay for this with a 10% tax on their family's estate, inheritance tax. So instead of inheritance tax just applying to a small number of people, about 4 or 5% of families, those with assets over £300,000 or £400,000, so pretty rich people by most standards, it would apply to absolutely everyone. So if you were, say, watching this programme this morning, you live in a £250,000 bungalow, you've got a little bit of cash in the bank, and you always thought that you were investing not just in your own future, but in your kids or your grandkids. You're expecting to have it on. And we know how hard it is to get people on the housing ladder today. Maybe people are already making plans as to what eventually would happen with that money.
Pass most of it on, wouldn't you? You wouldn't, on your analogy, you wouldn't pass on 25 grand.
Yeah, that's a lot of money, isn't it? If you think
I'm not saying it's a small
if you think that somebody has got 250, maybe 260 grand because they've got a little bit of cash in the bank, to end up spending £26,000 in tax to HMRC is a lot of money to people.
What do you think happens now, Robert? So even if you have got under £23,000 worth of saving in England, it's higher in Wales and Scotland, Northern Ireland, but you have a home, then if you have saved 28,000 or something, then the money comes off the house. They take that value of the house to pay for it. And if you're in a care home for sort of 5-6 years, that's gone anyway. So what do you think happens now to people's things?
No, I see that, and I see the. I see the unfairness.
That's what's happening.
Yeah, but it's not to everyone, is it? That's the point.
But in fairness, it's not to everyone. It's only to those who get dementia, which is somehow a preferable system. Now, I don't understand how anyone can watch that and think that what Robert Jenrick is saying is just mad, right? You've got a current system whereby if you don't get dementia, you can pass on your whole house. If you get dementia, you can pass on nothing. Right? Or a system where everyone gets to pass on 90% of the value of their house. And that's huge. I mean, I think inheritance tax should be about 50% anyway on everything, right? Because inheritance, you didn't earn it. I totally get the idea that people want to feel like they're passing something on to their kids. I'm not someone who thinks there should be no inheritance at all. I think, parents work throughout their life and they want to feel like I'm going to make life more comfortable for my kid when I pass. But to make a big deal out of 10% of that going to fund universal care for everyone, I just think is bananas.
See, I don't think we even need to talk about, I think that inheritance tax should be higher and that would be more socially just. I don't think we need to even say that. What Robert Jenrick is effectively advocating there is an anti-middle class political position, which is quite extraordinary for somebody who claims to be on the centre right of politics. He's saying if you worked hard your whole life, you've paid into an asset, you've got savings, but you're unlucky, screw you. And I can't for the life of me understand how the pro-family, pro-hard work, centre-right have arrived at this position. I really don't. It's completely anathema to everything they claim to believe in. Their reflex, however, is all tax is bad. All tax is bad. Therefore, we believe in property, we believe in families, we believe in passing on wealth, except in this particular instance where none of those things apply. It's quite extraordinary. And it's almost like he hasn't thought it through. She's saying this to him, Kate Garraway, in real time on GMB. Well, actually, all the things you're saying are completely undermined by your own political position. In terms of inheritance tax, right now in this country, it's, I think, 325 plus 175 if it's a only home.
Only home. And if it's two parents, they can put it together. So there are many people who you can inherit £1 million without there being any tax on it whatsoever.
But, a lot of people, basically, you can inherit up to £500,000 without paying a penny on inheritance tax. I mean, I would probably have that somewhat lower, but I'm actually not that left-wing on inheritance tax. I'd like to see a wealth tax on centimillionaires and billionaires. But I think we can chill out on this one a bit, because by virtue of the baby boomer cohort passing away, which is not a good thing, it's a sad thing, inheritance tax as part of the overall tax take of the state is going to go up anyway. That's just going to happen. It's presently about 6-7 billion a year. I think in 10 years, it's projected to be about double that, right? Purely by virtue of people having these huge assets which are worth so much, and there's lots of people who have them, right? That's just a sociological phenomenon of mass home ownership after the war. Anyway, so it's going to bring in lots of money regardless. I agree with you entirely that it should just be marginally higher. My dad's house, he lives in Bournemouth, right? 3-bed house in Bournemouth. It's worth about £600,000. That's crazy. Now, we could, if we wanted to, we could tax optimize it, right? Which is what the rich do. And he could pass it on to me, and after 7 years, we wouldn't pay any tax. But I'm quite happy to pay £25,000 inheritance tax on the £100,000 beyond the £500,000 threshold. In fact, I think that's far too little. I think that's far too little. At the same time, if my dad got dementia and the entirety of the value of that house was wiped out, he would feel so sad, because he'd say, son, I couldn't help you with, God willing, my next daughter comes along, my 2 granddaughters. So I think it's a perfectly sensible position to say, let's have a form of collective security around this. You pool risk. And so if you're unlucky enough to get dementia, we won't harm your prospects of passing property and wealth onto future generations. Right now, if you get cancer or have a heart attack, you're treated differently in terms of the tax system for your care to if you have dementia. That's clearly not fair, because it's a lottery. And I should also add one more thing. Dementia is the leading cause of death in this country. It has been for about a decade. Lots of people get it. It's not some rare condition. It's highly likely that, when we pass away, we will have dementia. It's a function, again, of an older society. Median life expectancy is stagnating, but we have a really large fraction of society living longer than ever. Many of those people, sadly, will get dementia. That is a horrible way to go, but it's also a sign of societal success, because people are living so long. So I think Andy Burnham, in short, is advocating a centre-right position. But because Thatcherite brain rot has infected people like Robert Jenrick for so long, they can't see the wood from the trees. And I think they're talking complete nonsense. And actually, I think this is a great opportunity to have a conversation about pooling risk, because these guys have no idea what they're talking about. They're completely undermining what should be a pro-middle class position.
Because at the moment, you have either a 0% tax or a 90% tax based on just luck.
Yeah.
And if everyone had a 10% tax, but you could feel secure, I mean, that just seems obviously better to me. And I agree with you that people should make a centre-right argument for that. Hopefully, Andy Burnham will be, articulate enough to do that. And Andy Burnham today did give his speech without notes. I know people think this is sort of banal or something to comment on. But, I mean, if you want someone to be able to get through a policy, it does matter that they're able to communicate. And Andy Burnham is obviously much more natural speaking, both to the press, to cameras, and to members of the public. This was a fairly sweet interaction today.
Nice to meet you. I'm Andy. I'm Andy.
Andrew.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
You are the local candidate, are you?
Oh, no. I was a local candidate. I had a by-election a few weeks ago, but no, I'm now the Prime Minister.
You what?
He's the Prime Minister.
What, a new one?
Another one.
But I keep changing it before.
I know.
That's very sweet. Burnham also showed himself to be better at populism than Keir Starmer.
I think social care in England is as unfair as American healthcare. The vulnerable pay with everything, and it can completely leave them with nothing. And that flaw has been in place for a long, long time, and common sense says it can't be fair. I think the review should look at practice across the system and where the best care is to be found. I'm not saying today that one sector is too big and therefore it will need to change. But we do have to be sure that there isn't profiteering in the system. I think that is where we absolutely draw the line. There are good organisations in all sectors, but what we cannot accept is money being taken out. And we actually do see that happening, not just in adult social care, we see it in children's social care too. And I think we do need to kind of make some changes there to answer the question that I was answering before about making the most of the money that we've got.
A few people in the comments rightly pointing out that it's not just dementia that means that someone needs care or even sort of residential care.
I mean, but
quite
it is
right.
that.
But that's the sort of
That's the leading cause of death in the country. I mean, I have some family members with Huntington's disease. I mean, we need to be realistic as well. It is dementia. I mean, and the reason why I'm saying that is because that is how you're going to win the argument. This is such a widespread thing. This touches almost every family in the country.
Do you think, because lots of people have tried to sort of, everyone says we want some sort of cross-party consensus and they never manage it. And sort of people start the argument and then they lose it. So Theresa May started an argument which she lost. I mean, her proposal wasn't very good. But Andy Burnham started an argument again in 2009, which he kind of lost. Do you think that this version of Andy Burnham as Prime Minister, do you think he has what it takes to do what many people have considered impossible, which is basically introduce a new tax and survive it?
So he's very popular, right? It seems already. He's got a honeymoon. His personality type, I think, is disposed to building cross-party consensus. He's not a polarizing political figure. He never has been, even when he was effectively a Blairite. You know, it's quite a personable operator. In terms of whether or not this sinks or swims, I think the problem is now much worse than it was when he was
Health Secretary
in a Labour government. I think it's much worse even than when Theresa May was the PM in 2017. And it's much worse on two levels. It's worse on the individual level. Families up and down the country have experienced seeing their assets wiped out. And equally, it's bankrupting local authorities. I think it's North Hampshire, where something like 75% of local authority spending is now on child and adult social care. So it's not all on stuff like this, but it's a big part of it. Those local authorities are simply not solvent. They're not, because of this escalating bill, which will only get worse. So somebody has to do something, right? And I think, on the other hand, like I started my answer with, he's quite, a personable guy. What I would say though, Michael, is this proposal of a 1.8% tax on everybody over 34 who's earning more than £6.2 thousand, whatever it was, £6,200. I think that's crazy. I think that the working age population are paying way too much in tax. There are people now, even on the middle tax band, if you include their student loan, if you include their private pension contributions, and obviously national insurance, these people are in mid-high 40s. If you are on more than 100,000, and people might be saying, well, so what if you're more than 100,000? Okay, let's say you're a new NHS consultant. You've just become a consultant. You've got a young family. Your partner or wife or husband doesn't work. They're looking after two kids at home. You don't get child benefit. You don't get free nursery hours. You don't get tax credits with nursery care. You've lost out on all of that stuff. You're basically paying a 60% tax on £100,000 to £125,000, and now you're being told you're going to pay an extra 1.8% tax. So I think from quite wealthy people like that NHS consultant to somebody who's just middle of the road, between income tax, NI contributions, and student loans, I think it's too much to ask. And I think we should be increasing inheritance tax. I think that's a sensible way to do it. Whether you bring down the threshold at which that starts to kick in, or whether you increase the actual rate of inheritance tax. I'm not a fan of inheritance tax because I think ultimately the ultra-rich are very good at not paying it. They get very clever accountants. But I think that's a much more elegant solution than increasing taxes on the working age population. And I think it'll probably be more popular as well.
I think there could be a way of doing an estates tax where I think basically if you hand it, they need to get rid of that 7-year limit, I think. If you've given your kid a house, then the moment you die, it should be taxed, whether or not the kids had it for 7 years.
I think Reeves was looking, I might be wrong, we should probably check this out, but Reeves was looking at extending it so it'd be longer than 7 years. I think maybe you could do 15 years or something. I think that's quite sensible, right? I agree with you.
Zack Polanski has said he will not apologise for sharing a post that included an image of a T-shirt with a guillotine and a reference to Nigel Farage. He said this to Newsnight.
That you accept as a leader of a political party responsibility for what you share on social media. And you have also said this was a mistake.
Yes.
And that you didn't read it properly. Do you want to take this opportunity to apologise to Nigel Farage?
Well, if I'd done it deliberately, I'd be apologising. But because this was a mistake, I think the important thing is that I point out it's a mistake. that I also make sure that I condemn political violence. And also, crucially, I make a commitment to be better on my social media.
Okay. Do you want to apologise then or not?
No, the reason for that is because Nigel Farage, when I posted this, or when the person posted it, it got less than 1,000 likes. Nigel Farage then took it, cropped it, so it made it look like I posted it, which I think was fundamentally dishonest. It's now had 3.2 million views. So actually, this whole conversation has been seen more because Nigel Farage, Lee Youssef, and I think Richard Tice posted it. So I'm accepting my responsibility in that I shouldn't have evicted that collaboration. I'm accepting that we all need to condemn political violence. But I also think the reporting to the police, the ramping up of the language to say this is incitement to murder me, feels like that's also putting me in a dangerous spot.
So, Aaron, we talked about this yesterday, in fact. We both agreed that Reform's response to this, which is not the end of the world, it's someone accepting a share or a collaboration request on Instagram, and it's one of 20 photos. Not the end of the world, but then Zia Youssef says the police must arrest him tomorrow. Obviously, we mocked basically their response yesterday. I'm not sure that the line, yes, it was wrong, but I didn't do it on purpose, so therefore I'm not going to apologize. I don't know if that, you can apologize for stuff that you can say, of course I apologize, but their response was mad. I think it just seems a bit strange to say, if I'd done it on purpose, I would have apologized. That's not really how most people think about apologies. I apologize for stuff that I did by mistake all the time.
Right. Well, imagine when Alec Baldwin shot somebody on set. Imagine if Alec Baldwin said, well, look, I didn't do it on purpose. I'm not going to say sorry. People bump into, Brits are the most apologetic people on earth. Maybe the Canadians actually beat them. But, people bump into each other on the train. Oh my God, I'm sorry. Everybody says sorry all the time for everything. Should he say, please, Nigel Farage, forgive me for my transgressions? Of course he shouldn't. That's silly. But I think it's quite sensible just to go, look, it's a mistake. It's not the end of the world. It's a collaboration. It's ridiculous that they're calling for me to be arrested. I think it shows how desperate they are right now. They're in danger of becoming politically irrelevant because fundamentally they've had a very bad 2026. They lost the Makefield by-election. They lost Gorton and Denton. And this is where you end up, calling for people to be arrested, calling for Sky News to be taken off air. I think there's a Reform MSP today calling for somebody else to be arrested. I think they were talking about taking the BBC off air at one point. Richard Tice attacking the BBC, as we covered yesterday. So he should be quite comfortable to say, look, it's a mistake. I'm sorry. We all make mistakes. The important story here is that Reform are all at sea. And fundamentally, because they have no political vision for the country, they're increasingly looking like a balmy political operation. That's what I think he should say. And I think most people say he's right. Reform don't look serious right now. We've got second week of Andy Burnham as PM. He's talking about reforming social care in this country. And Reform are contesting a by-election against the guy dressed as a bin and trying to get MSPs and Scottish lawyers and Zack Polanski arrested. They sound like a joke right now. He should say that. He should say, look, this is a joke. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. We all make mistakes all of the time. That's fine. That's part of being human. And that's another thing, by the way. People say, he shouldn't apologize. Don't give in to them. To some extent, yeah. When it's stuff like the IHRA, that's a political line, right? That's a political question. We opposed Labour adopting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. This was just, he clicked accept when he shouldn't have. You can say sorry for that. It's really not a huge deal. And again, anybody sensible can, I think, look at the response from Zia Youssef in particular, saying, if he's not in prison by this time tomorrow, as utterly outlandish and not something you'd expect from people who are going to be in government anytime soon.
Let's speak to someone from the Greens. Geraldine Coggins is standing as the Green Party candidate to be Greater Manchester Mayor. That election, of course, takes place tomorrow. It's the election to replace Andy Burnham as Mayor of Greater Manchester. We'll the campaign in a moment, Geraldine. First of all, is this an unhelpful distraction the day before a key election?
Hi, folks. Thank you for having me. I think this was just a genuine mistake, wasn't it? And really, we're not seeing this impacting on the doorstep. I think it is one of those stories that is perhaps quite big in political broadcasts, but not on the doorsteps. I mean, what we're hearing on the doorsteps is the same as we've been hearing all the time, that the cost of living is very hard for people. People are struggling to make ends meet, to pay their bills. Young people are struggling to get jobs. And the people are really quite tired with the old parties and are ready for some real change.
The Greens, I mean, you had that amazing result in Gorton and Denton, where it was very much Greens versus Reform. This mayoral race does look different. So more in common, they have a poll, I think it was released yesterday. Bev Craig of Labour, they say, is on 39%. The Greens, so you, in third with 14%. Obviously, the big difference there is that in Gorton and Denton, Keir Starmer was Prime Minister. Now Andy Burnham's Prime Minister. Do the Greens, I suppose, have a problem with maintaining momentum now they're not standing against a very, very unpopular Prime Minister?
No, I mean, there's been very little polling in this election and not a lot of information to go on. What we're hearing on the doorsteps is a lot of enthusiasm for our campaign. We're seeing more Green campaigners out than any other party. We're seeing more poster boards up than any other party. And we're just getting very positive responses on the doorstep. We're still hearing people moving from Labour to Green. And it seems like Reform have packed up and gone home to Clacton. They don't seem to be running much of a campaign. We're the ones who've been taking it seriously, running a very high energy, high impact campaign. In fact, the others haven't even been coming to hustings. We've seen the Labour candidate, very disappointingly, not come to the cost of living hustings, not come to the Forum of Muslim Organisations hustings, and no one except me went to the climate and nature hustings. So we're the ones running the high energy campaign, getting out there with a serious plan and a long-term vision for the city region.
And I mean, what are you aiming for at this point? There's always, people always talk about expectation management.
Sure.
Would you consider coming in second as a victory tomorrow?
We're feeling really confident. We are out there to win this. We're out there to gather every vote we can, and the vote tomorrow is the only one that counts. And we've seen, as you mentioned, that seismic win by my Trafford colleague Hannah Spencer in Gorton and Denton. The people who voted for that. People had, I've knocked doors. I've knocked doors for long over 10 years, and I could see that loss of hope, that betrayal and huge disillusionment people have had. And what happened in Gorton and Denton, we gave people hope. There was that energy, that spark. People are kind of done with the tinkering around the edges and incrementalism, I think people know that putting a new shiny Prime Minister in front of the same 400 MPs, none of whom apparently were fit to be Prime Minister themselves, is going to make a difference. It's, a new singer, but it's the same old song, and nationally, we're hearing Manchesterism touted as the solution to all our problems. Here in Greater Manchester, we know that it's the problem that we're trying to solve, that it's brought us massive inequality, that, Labour have poured money into these developers and corporate landlords who have siphoned it off out of the city centre. And our towns and high streets are feeling really left behind. And that's before we even get into their failure on Gaza.
I mean, so we talked on this show about sort of different perspectives on Manchesterism. So there was sort of what Burnham at times put forward, what people like Matt Lawrence, who's come on the show, have suggested, which is it's very much about bringing the buses into public ownership. There's another account of Manchesterism, which is saying, it was very much actually saying, we really just need to build stuff. We're willing to make compromises with private developers. What we want is a private sector-led boom in Manchester, and that will trickle out to sort of greater employment and growth levels. Now, there is, my opinion is probably a little bit of both. But from Andy Burnham's popularity and the stability of Manchester government over the past couple of decades, whatever it is, isn't it quite popular? I mean, obviously, when you ask people about UK politics, everyone says, oh, it's broken, it's terrible, yada, yada, yada. Manchester seems like the part of the country where people are most sort of satisfied with their governance. Is that a misinterpretation on my part?
No, I think that initial characterization you gave of that Labour's developer-led rip-off, that trickle-down economics, that characterizes it exactly, I think. But I mean, you mentioned Manchester. This is Greater Manchester. If you go and talk to people in Wigan, in Rochdale, in Tameside, in Oldham, you will hear a very different story. In Bolton, you will see, boarded up high streets. You will see people really struggling to get by. Labour bleat on about this economic success of Greater Manchester, but, this is the same same story we see with all the establishment parties. This is a story of massive inequality, of parties that are working for big business and very wealthy, small number of people, while the real people who live here and are struggling to get on with their lives are really being deeply let down, and they know that.
Geraldine Coggins, thank you so much for joining us. Good luck with the rest of your campaign. I bet you'll have a busy 24 hours ahead of you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Aaron, I suppose let's briefly talk about this election tomorrow. I mean, when Andy Burnham sort of first resigned, or when there was discussions about him standing to be in Westminster, there was lots of serious conversation about this could be a really difficult, damaging by-election for the Labour Party. It seems that, in fact, this will probably be pretty easy for them.
If Keir Starmer was still the Prime Minister, then I suspect that you may have just been speaking to the next mayor of Greater Manchester. I think it obviously would have been very, very close. The big story for me, Michael, is, look, it's quite plausible that the Greens come second tomorrow and that Reform come third. And remember, in Makerfield in the local elections, they beat Labour by 2-1. That was in May. So I think Reform in many ways have had a terrible 2026. I know that sounds crazy when you think how well they did, like I say, in May in the local elections, but also in Wales as well, and Scotland. But they have in many ways had a very underwhelming 2026. I think there's now a feeling that maybe they peaked in 2025. They still could be the largest party, by the way, and have peaked last year. But that to me will be the really big story tomorrow if Reform come third. And because of eliminatory sort of ballot, there will be people who tactically vote Green first and then Labour second, so that it's a even if they think Labour are going to win because Labour are polling so well. I wonder how many people will actually vote like that. I think because this is still quite a novel way to do politics in this country, the mayors are still quite a new thing. I don't think that'll be very mainstream. I suspect in 10, 20 years' time, actually quite a lot of people will be doing that. But I think, a Labour Green 1-2 would be pretty extraordinary. And then I think there'll be real questions to answer from the Reform lot. Like I say, Nigel Farage contesting a by-election against the bin, them calling for everybody to be arrested, them getting absolutely smashed in the Makerfield by-election. I have to say, what we heard there about, the Burnham brand isn't actually that big beyond Manchester itself. Not really true, is it? He got 54%, I think, in Makerfield. He won by a pretty large margin. He's a very well-liked man right across the region. I've met many people who normally vote Tory, but vote Labour when Andy Burnham's the name on the ballot. So now he's PM. I think it's a really good test of his popularity as a national leader when it's not actually voting for him. I think it's fascinating.
And there'll be 3 elections in a row in the Northwest that Reform initially said they had a really good chance of winning.
Yeah.
That they have not even come close, actually. So Gorton and Denton, Makerfield, and then, unless there's an enormous upset tomorrow, they will be nowhere near winning the Manchester mayoral race, which actually does really undermine their argument that sort of, they're ready to sweep the nation.
If they come second and they get 20% plus, they can still say that's big progress, right?
Yeah, but they were briefing that they might win this, right?
Yeah, but Burnham's now the Prime Minister, and this was a place with a Labour supermajority the last time there was an election for Greater Manchester Mayor. I don't think they will. I have a sneaking suspicion the Greens might come second. I hope so anyway. You're not meant to say that as a journalist, are you?
I think we're allowed to say we hope the Greens come ahead of Reform in the election. I don't think that's going to surprise anyone.
But it's an election tomorrow, and but the point is, you're meant to be trying to pass on. That's why people love Novara Media, Michael. We're trying to pass on impartial, objective points of view. We're not trying to propagandize. Maybe sometimes. But, I think here, genuinely, I think it's plausible the Greens will come second, and I hope they do. For the reason you're saying, I think it will politically compound some pretty significant problems for Reform. Who have voters in that part of the world. Really important to say. I met them. There's lots of them. But I think it's a very soft vote.
Gianni Infantino, the president of FIFA, was already unpopular with football fans, from fake peace prizes to hydration breaks and sky-high ticket prices to retracted red cards. The cynicism of football's global governing board was a stain on an otherwise entertaining World Cup. That cynicism has now gone even further into overdrive. On Tuesday, the Times revealed that Gianni Infantino was planning to sell private stakes in the World Cup in a scheme that could personally make him tens of millions of pounds. Now, FIFA is currently a not-for-profit organisation, effectively owned by the 200 and 11 national associations that make up its membership. So the FA being a member and then every other sort of national football association. But Infantino plans to spin out a for-profit company with him at the helm, presumably on a very good salary, and private investors taking a minority stake. And it gets worse, it gets more cynical, because the investor group set to take a lead stake is led by this man. This is Joshua Kushner, a managing partner of the venture capital firm Thrive Capital. And yes, if you recognized that surname, it's because he's the younger brother of Jared Kushner. Now, Jared Kushner is, of course, Donald Trump's son-in-law. The closeness between Trump and Infantino has long been a source of contention. And the Times says that two sources with knowledge of the discussions said that figures close to the Donald Trump administration have been consulted about this latest plan. Now, it's worth noting, none of the national football associations had been consulted about this plan. So this was leaked to the Times. And all the while, Gianni Infantino, if these sources are correct, had been discussing with Donald Trump how to basically privatize FIFA with a big stake going to Donald Trump's son-in-law. Now, the objections to Infantino's plan have come in thick and fast. UEFA, so that's the European Football Federation, said this crosses a line that football's governing institutions should never cross. UEFA takes it extremely seriously. So should every national football association. So every stakeholder, leagues, clubs, players, supporters, governments, and everyone who cares about the future of the game. The soul and governance of football are not assets to trade, especially with zero transparency as to who gains financially. None of us are the owners of football. It is not FIFA's to sell. And the former head of FIFA, who himself was at the center of a fair few corruption scandals, posted this. So this is Sepp Blatter. The close relationship between the FIFA president and the US president has reached a financial dimension that is deeply damaging to football. No one has the right to sell our game. And Andy Burnham also got in on the action.
Let me say this very clearly. Football does not belong to investors. It belongs to the people who fill the stands, who stand on the touchlines week in, week out, rain or shine. The World Cup is not a product. It is the greatest competition in the world, and it was never anyone's to sell. Dress the deal up however you like. Once you have sold a piece of it, you have sold out. It belongs to the supporters. It always has, and it always will.
And that is very much Andy Burnham in his comfort zone. Infantino's plan will require the support of a majority of FIFA's member associations. Now, the big European associations have already expressed their opposition, so they presumably won't vote for this proposal. But Infantino is hoping to win the support of smaller footballing federations, which is the majority of them, who rely on FIFA for funding. So this is from a Times sort of update on this story today. So they report that in a letter to the national associations, Infantino spells out the financial rewards of allowing private investors to buy stakes in the tournament and says the decision must be taken by September the 19th. He says that a funding package totaling $10 billion will become available if associations sign up. But if they reject it, their earnings will be $2.7 billion, almost 75% less. Sources opposed to the plan have told the Times they believe it is pure bribery. Aaron, this is an interesting situation because it's one of those ones where, you know, on the face of it, it looks very democratic because it's one national association, one vote. You know, you don't get more votes if you're the FA, which is, you know, a very lucrative organization that controls the Premier League. But if you're the Ghanaian Football Association or even Cape Verde's Football Association, you get the same votes as the FA. So very egalitarian. But it also does mean that, I mean, one of the reasons why it's so corrupt is because it's very easy to, I mean, essentially bribe those small associations.
Yeah.
Not because they're more, you know, corrupt individuals than the British FA, but because they don't have any money. You can't bribe the
English
British
FA, Michael.
You can't bribe
Please.
the English FA because it's got loads of money. Like these figures that we're talking about here don't mean anything to the FA, but they mean a lot to Cape Verde, for example. Curacao.
Yeah, I mean, UEFA is the European Federation. They are the ones that are most opposed to this. It looks as well like the North American Federation, ironically, may be opposed to it as well. But yeah, Infantino basically has most of Asia, Africa, South America, I don't know about Oceania, in his pocket. So he could win. However, a World Cup without the European sides is not a World Cup. 6 of the 8 quarterfinalists in the last tournament were, of course, the European sides. I can't remember of the last 8 winners. 6 were European again, I think. Look, if there is a World Cup without the European sides, the finalists will be Brazil, Argentina, pretty much every time. Maybe Morocco might have a chance. So it'll be a very predictable, dull tournament. People love to wax lyrical about the World Cup and the World coming together. I do as well, but we also have to be realistic. Brazil, Argentina, one or two other teams, plus the Europeans, are effectively the only teams that are highly competitive and able to beat anyone else. And I think that's...
So just to take a step back, because I didn't mention it in my intro, one of the responses being discussed is that the Europeans, instead of just, because they'll vote, but the Europeans could say, if this goes forward, we'll boycott the next World Cup. So it's just to...
Of course, that's easy to say when it's 4 years away, right? The big question would be, for instance, the Women's World Cup is next year. Would you boycott that? That's a FIFA tournament. Would European teams within UEFA boycott the World Club Cup, a FIFA tournament? So, those are separate questions. Would you boycott, the international friendlies with, teams outside your region if the relevant associations were backing this move, for instance? Personally, I think UEFA should walk away if that's what happens. And people might be saying, well, Aaron, that's ridiculous. Look at what we just had. The water breaks, the hydration breaks every 15 minutes. We had a show at halftime with Shakira and, all these Bouncy Bee. Who are we listening to?
BTS. And Burna Boy. I think that's what the amalgam
Shakira,
of that you've created into
Katy
Bouncy
Perry?
Bee.
I have no idea.
Katy Perry wasn't there.
Okay.
Who was it? It was Madonna walked out.
Madonna.
Justin Bieber.
I just about know her.
Did an acoustic set.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
And that's before you've got
Shakira was good. The rest was bad.
That's before you've got
Chris
investment. Chris Martin. That's before you've got investment from the likes of BlackRock and JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. Okay.
And Donald Trump's.
Yeah, that's before those guys are in town. So, I'm being serious. You would start to see games where, halftime might last an hour, where you'd have 4 breaks each half, where you have 120 teams at the World Cup. But, this is ludicrous. And the reason why the World Cup started as a tournament had nothing to do with this. And Michael, I'll say this, as somebody with literally no English heritage, football was started by working class people in this country, and they took it around the world. It was a game of and for the working classes. Juventus have a white and black strip that is based on the Notts County kit, okay? All kinds of huge football clubs globally were effectively started. AC Milan was started by an Englishman. It was originally a football and cricket club, right? The most successful Italian team in terms of European club football. So this was a game started by and for the working class. These people were emissaries of a game, and it was a cosmopolitan project. They were talking to people. They often couldn't share a language, but they shared a love of the game. And what FIFA is now trying to do with Infantino is completely at odds with the spirit of football and everything I love about football. And I think many people feel the same. So absolutely should be resisted. If that means that UEFA and the FA and the various European associations have nothing to do with FIFA, so be it. There will not be a World Cup that anyone watches. Screw these guys.
I mean, because ultimately, what Infantino would say, obviously, he's a very cynical man, and I think he just wants like a very well-paid job, and he likes sort of gallivanting around with presidents and the like. But if you were to be as sympathetic to him as you possibly could be,
sure.
and the explicit argument he will make is that the reason, FIFA already makes loads of money, by the way. It doesn't need this private investment to make loads of money. But the reason he's popular with many of the countries is because FIFA has distributed quite a lot of money to small football associations. And obviously, the Europeans don't need that money, but the Europeans don't, the Europeans are loaded. European football clubs are loaded, right? The European national football associations are loaded. So if Infantino's saying, look, this money might not mean much to you, but it means a lot to all of these global South countries. And by the way, that means that they're going to be more competitive at future World Cup. So what you're doing in Europe is actually you're just trying to pull the ladder up and give no one else the opportunity to have a leading, well-funded football culture.
Yeah. I love this idea that the more money you have, the more competitive you are in football. I mean, look at the United States, for goodness sake. They're crap. They're terrible. Look at Brazil.
Definitely helps though, right?
Not really, Michael. If you look at Brazil now, they're not a patch on the side that, say, won the World Cup in 2002. I think Rivaldo, as a child, used to sort of walk 20 kilometers to train. These stories of people historically, Tostao, Jairzinho, Pele, but all the way through to that cohort of players, These people come from very humble, poor backgrounds. Often, one of the reasons why.
But then they get developed by football academies, right? That's what you hear about France, which is that you have poor kids from multicultural backgrounds in the banlieues, sort of like obsessed with football, playing it all the time. But then they get finessed in these well-funded academies.
It really, honestly, Michael, as a sport, it's not a function of investment and money. If that was the case, then England would have 5 World Cups by now, because we put so much into our academies as a result of the Premier League being such a well-funded, outstanding national and international product. So this idea that, well, these smaller associations will have more money, therefore they develop better players, it just doesn't work like that. What you're talking about, what you're describing is patronage networks, right? Infantino is an autocrat. So there will be some, it's like Erdogan in Turkey. Some people love Erdogan because he gives them money, you know? And they're not stupid. It's not false consciousness. But he is also often at odds with quite basic principles of equality under the law and due process and impartiality and democracy.
The clientelist system.
Exactly. And that's what we're seeing with Infantino. And, you know, that is at odds with, I think, the founding principles of FIFA. Go back to a story we talked about last week with these rings. Do you remember that story?
Rings?
The rings. On Tuesday last week, you weren't with me. Since 1930, there have been a few constants at World Cups, right? First World Cup, Uruguay won it in Uruguay, 1930. The Century World Cup, the Centenary World Cup will be in 4 years' time, right? A few constants, one of which is medals. The winner gets a gold medal, the follow-up runner-up gets a silver medal, and in the first World Cup in Uruguay, they sold bronze medals to the public. Now, the winners of this World Cup, Spanish national side, the whole squad of 30 players, there'll be 30 rings made available. It'll be for the manager and the assistant manager and goodness who, but 30 rings will be available. And they're green emeralds and diamonds. They're huge bling bling.
I hadn't seen this.
You haven't seen this?
No.
30 are available to the squad, but then another 1,996 are made available to the public, which brings the number of rings up to 2026, which is the year. And it's crazy.
This is so tacky.
It's tacky, but also the idea that you can just buy a ring, which is a World Cup winner's ring, the point is you get that if you win the World Cup. So on the one hand, there's a critique, which is this is an Americanism. I don't really buy that because America hosts the World Cup. They can do what they like. They can put their stupid American spin on it. That's the point, right? The Brits can do the same when they host it, or the Saudis, or whatever. But this is basically a money-making scheme where FIFA can cream in possibly millions of pounds from basically the global 0.001% buying a piece of jewelry, which fundamentally should only go to people who've actually won a World Cup. So look, they're doing this before they get the private investment. I don't want to even think about what the tournament would be like afterwards. It would be horrific. You know, this is what happens with capitalism, Michael. It eats its own face. So yes, there's loads of money now. What they would create is an unwatchable tournament, which would be shit. The Europeans wouldn't be in it. There'd be infinity ad breaks. And you know what? People would start watching some other, you know, in sub-Saharan Africa, they'd probably say, actually, you know, I like watching the Africa Cup of Nations. It's better. There aren't all these stupid breaks, right? And then that's when American venture capital say, we're going to invest in the Copa America and the African Cup of Nations because actually that gets more eyeballs. No. Andy Burnham's right. And by the way, Michael, people don't need to have bought the Andy Burnham Kool-Aid to agree with this, I hope. Anyway, it's fabulous. We have a prime minister that can talk about something like this in just such a direct, immediate register. Isn't that great?
I mean, it's helpful.
It's helpful.
I mean, people always said about Keir Starmer, that was the one, he did actually like football, but he still couldn't communicate that he liked football, whereas I think Andy Burnham has an Everton season ticket, doesn't he? By the way, if you're ever wondering why I'm sort of in the summer months fidgeting down here, it's because we don't have aircon, but we do have a fan, which means that my papers are constantly trying to fly away. I have to sort of try and keep them down. We got a little bit more of an update on Infantino for you. We'll go through this quite quickly, I have to say. So he's been very active on social media this past week, slamming his haters. So in sort of loads and loads of sort of Instagram reel, he really yapped on. To everyone who missed our beautiful game, the emotions, the celebrations, the laughter, the crying, the deception and the joy, to all of you who missed watching kids, babies, grandparents and parents come together for the beautiful game, I say sorry that the matches are now over and sorry that you missed all that joy and togetherness. Sorry that you were so consumed by hate and criticism that you missed it all. So he's so much like Donald Trump. To those behind their pens and papers, behind their screens, spreading hate and false rumors, I want to say that while you are sitting behind, we at FIFA are on the front lines, organizing, working hard, and delivering the best show in the world. While you hide, we are exploring the streets of Canada, Mexico, and the United States, talking with fans, engaging with people, and ensuring everyone's safety. While you divide, we unite. People come together as families, as fans, as one. And then he says, we experience no violence, no incidents, 100% safety and security, only joy and happiness. 7 million people from over 200 countries enjoyed the tournament across 16 fantastic cities and stadiums. 0 incidents, 0 hostility, 0 violence, just joy, emotions, happiness, unity, and togetherness. All was safe, secure, and happy. Now, of course, I mean, one, that's ridiculous. He does sound like a kind of angry teenager, exactly like Donald Trump. 2, the Spanish team might not agree there were 0 incidents of violence. So the World Cup final was marred by the Argentinian side pushing and shoving the winning Spanish team after the full-time whistle was blown. That behavior is currently subject to a FIFA investigation. But Infantino appears to be preempting those results, sending a letter to the Argentinian FA congratulating their team for their professionalism, which is not how the rest of the world saw it. That's not the only example of Infantino having a different take on the World Cup to everyone else who witnessed it. Infantino's rambling Instagram post went on to celebrate how Iran entered the United States without any issues, is what he suggested. Now, that's, of course, the same Iranian team that had their training camp moved from the US to Mexico at the last minute and weren't able to stay after their matches beyond a couple of hours to try and cool down. So that being an example of sort of why we should be so proud of this World Cup does seem a little bit bizarre. Why have FIFA, Aaron, and the United States attracted such a similar personality type to become president? Is there some sort of connection we can draw between these two organizations?
Well, I think sports associations are uniquely disposed to getting these kinds of people, right? We saw it with Sepp Blatter, and those aren't the only two. Big money's involved, lots of status. It's very easy. I think if you're going to be the head of FIFA, you should be a former footballer, personally, or somebody involved in the world of football. This guy was in management, right? And the way he talks, we made this tournament possible. No, you didn't. The footballers make it possible. The fans make it possible. You did nothing. You know, the world was transfixed by the performances of people like Kylian Mbappe and Lionel Messi and Jude Bellingham. He literally thinks, Michael, I sincerely believe this, Gianni Infantino honestly thinks he played as important a role in this World Cup as any of the names I just mentioned. The man is a megalomaniac. I hope the European federations humiliate him. He's truly delulu.
Someone says, Sunshine Tarot, you know, Michael has not once pissed me off tonight. Must be the morning's full moon. Well, we're moving on to AI, so depending on your tastes, this might be the point at which you get annoyed.
Just you wait.
Just you wait, yeah. Don't speak too soon. More than 1,000 AI workers and executives have called on the US government to, quote, pace AI development. A slightly ambiguous word there. The open letter comes soon after a rogue OpenAI agent autonomously planned and executed a hack of another tech company. It actually hacked 4 companies in the end. The agent was on the loose for days before OpenAI realized what had happened. Now, this open letter, which has been signed by employees across OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, and Alphabet, says this. So it says, AI could help create a dramatically better future, but that outcome is not guaranteed. The world's leading AI companies believe they could be close to automating AI research. It is hard to predict exactly how much this will accelerate AI progress, but there is a real risk that capability development rapidly accelerates beyond our ability to understand or control the resulting systems. So I suppose translated, this is the idea we talked about a fair amount on this show. If AI research becomes fully automated, we might then lose control of the output because AI is training AI and we've got nothing to do with it. It's what's been long referred to as recursive self-improvement, which they say is we're on the cusp of, basically. So the letter goes on. To realize AI's potential, industry, government, and society at large may need the option to buy time to address emerging risks, develop security measures, and strengthen oversight. But each company and country is under intense competitive pressure not to unilaterally slow that acceleration. And today, the world lacks the technical and governance tools to deliberately pace frontier-wide progress. So this is the signatories saying that the companies know they're doing something dangerous, but that they have no way of stopping because then other companies or other countries will jump ahead. So it's a collective action problem. And this is their suggestion. This is what the letter is calling for. So they say, building on work already underway to monitor frontier model releases, we request that the US government support an international effort to develop the technical and governance tools needed to deliberately pace the frontier of automated AI development. Now, the OpenAI letter is signed by sort of employees of these companies from junior to senior, also includes some CEOs. So Anthropic boss Dario Amodei has signed it, and the chief scientists at OpenAI and Meta have also signed it. It's been shared by the OpenAI and Anthropic official Twitter accounts, right? As of Wednesday evening, Sam Altman has not signed the letter, but he has given an interview where he stressed he too cares about AI safety.
This is the first sort of security incident that I have felt very viscerally. I've been a little surprised that, and it's only been a few days, but I've been a little surprised that more people don't feel it so viscerally.
And so what do you do about that? So obviously 2 months from now, it's going to be more powerful.
Yep. I mean, there's some short-term stuff you do. So we paused training. We have to figure out how to secure our sandboxing in a world of multiple 0 days being chained together. But then there's long-term questions about what do you do if this is going to be the new rate of progress. We have to pace the rate of AI development to give ourselves enough time for society to harden around some of these new capability levels, and trying to figure out how we do that in a way that does not feel like regulatory capture for anyone and also does not feel like collusion among the frontier labs. That's going to take some work and is important to get right.
So if OpenAI were to genuinely pause training of its AI models and to do it for a considerable amount of time, that would be a very big deal. Altman, though, really has made no statement about how long the pause would be. I'm not even sure it's sort of necessarily confirmed in what he said that it's still in effect, right? It's also worth remembering, multiple former colleagues of Sam Altman have described him as a habitual liar. So I'm not sure how seriously we should take him, but how seriously should we take this open letter? Is it a genuine call for regulation from a group of concerned scientists and executives, or something more cynical? Well, I spoke earlier to Garrison Lovely, a journalist who's written for Jacobin and the New York Times on the AI race. His new book, Obsolete, the AI industry's trillion-dollar race to replace us and how to stop it, is out later this year. Garrison Lovely, thank you so much for joining us on Novara Media.
Great to be here.
Let's start with this open letter. How big a deal is this? Is this sort of genuinely workers in these companies trying to save the world, or is this another PR stunt, perhaps?
I think it's not a PR stunt. I think it is a big deal. I also think it doesn't go far enough. But the story is basically that now over 1,200 employees of frontier AI companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and others asked the US government to support an international effort to develop the technical and governance tools needed to deliberately pace the frontier of automated AI development. So kind of a complicated sentence and something that was probably worked over by a lot of comms departments at these companies, because the official OpenAI and Anthropic accounts actually shared this on Twitter. But basically they're saying hey, we need the ability to pump the brakes or to slow AI capabilities progress internationally, because these companies and people like Sam Altman, Dario Amodei have argued that, look, it's going to be the US or China winning this AI race. And if you want democracy to win, then you need to invest in the United States and we need to move fast. And I have written about the flaws in that thinking. But I think the notable thing is that if you have international guardrails that are binding between the two superpowers here, it actually undercuts that argument a lot. And at the same time, you need international guardrails between those two countries to avoid things that neither country or no country wants, such as, rogue states or rogue groups having access to superhuman hackers or potentially superhuman bioengineers that could create novel bioweapons. We're in a world where cyber capabilities became superhuman first. And that's scary, but it's also not as bad as if suddenly like the models got really good at coaching a novice through building a bioweapon, something that nobody should want. We're going to need guardrails, and this is like a big step toward that. The reason it doesn't go far enough is because I think it's democratically illegitimate to be pursuing what they want, which is universal labor replacing machines. And that was true before the latest AI safety incident. It also just happens to be unsafe, but we didn't need another reason to stop what's happening now.
Let's take a step back, actually, because I mean, we discuss AI a lot on this show, and still sort of a large part of the audience, very understandably, are in the camp that this is all hot air. Partly because you see this sort of cognitive dissonance. If you've got these AI CEOs who are saying, this really could kill everyone, but also I'm going to keep working on it. And there is something inherently suspicious about that. They are also trying to keep their stock prices up, trying to keep their valuations up for the ones that haven't gone public yet. I know you're very much sort of in this debate. So sort of you're someone on the left, you write for Jacobin, or you've written for Jacobin, and you think that this is a big deal. You think that they're not bluffing, but also that they do need to be held to account. So I suppose just position yourself in that debate for us, please.
Yeah, it's a tricky needle to thread. And I totally get the skepticism of like, wait, you say this is so dangerous, it could kill everybody, and yet you're still building it. But their justification is that like, well, look, if we don't do it, if OpenAI doesn't do it, Anthropic or Google will do it. And if we, American industry, don't do it, then Chinese industry will do it. And I think the first one, it's like clearly there are a number of American AI companies that are gunning for what they call artificial general intelligence, what I call the obsoleting project, which is trying to render us all obsolete. They really do believe that this will happen. And in fact, they think it's inevitable. And once you accept that it's inevitable, then it's all a question of who does it and how they do it. And I push back on the inevitability frame, but I also push back on the impossibility frame, which is adopted by many people on the left. And my claim is not that it's definitely possible or definitely will happen, but just that we can't rule it out. And the stakes are way too high to get it wrong, because if you err in the direction of not taking it seriously, but it's actually possible and happens in the next few years, then everything is up for grabs, including like the total disempowerment of all workers and potentially all people forever. And so this letter is a big step towards saying it's not inevitable that we move as fast as possible, which is a like foot in the door to actually slowing or stopping the race. And if you stop it for any amount of time, I think it's a lot easier to see how it stops for a much longer period of time, because you'll have the mechanism internationally and institutionally to pump the brakes.
I mean, at the same time, I suppose to go back to the cynicism, and this is a different kind of cynicism, because I'm with you on this being a very big deal. I don't think they're just making up the fact that this is a revolutionary technology. But in terms of the significance of this letter, I suppose where I have doubts is, I mean, first of all, when I initially saw this story, I thought this was maybe a more grassroots thing. So it's sort of the workers against the management, perhaps. But clearly, when you've got people like Dario Amodei signing it, as you say, it's sort of been shared by the OpenAI and Anthropic accounts. It's something which is more sort of integral to the management of these companies. And they're smart people, right? And they know that the president of the United States is Donald Trump. They know that Donald Trump is not in any rush to regulate AI. They know that Donald Trump is not in any rush to come to any kind of agreement with China. And when it comes to practical regulations that are being put forward in Congress, most of these companies, especially OpenAI, they fund super PACs to campaign against candidates who genuinely want to regulate AI. So my negative read on this, if I were to put one forward, is that they know this isn't going to happen. They know they have a very powerful technology which could cause lots of damage. But in the case that it causes lots of damage in the near future, they want to be able to say, well, we did ask to be regulated, so don't blame us. Blame the US government or the failure of the Americans and the Chinese to come to some form of treaty agreement. Do you differ from that perspective? I mean, you seem sort of less cynical than me about this letter at the moment.
I think that the politics of this are moving very fast. And the relevant context here is that a pair of OpenAI models that are specialized in hacking broke out of OpenAI, hacked their way out of their supposedly secure environment, hopped around a bunch of OpenAI servers until they got access to the internet, hacked into a company, used that as a staging ground to hack into another company, this one being a multi-billion-dollar software company, to get answers to a test that they had been given on cybersecurity. And they demonstrated, I think what is fair to say is like superhuman hacking capabilities in both speed and like the number of novel vulnerabilities they found and exploited. Also, AIs have disproven major things in mathematics that have been worked over by many mathematicians for decades. In the last week, the latest thing is Claude found some, errors or like vulnerabilities in some cryptography approaches that people have been using. And this is just like once breakthroughs start happening in a field, you can expect more and more over time because that's just how the technology has tended to work. And so, yeah, like 2 weeks ago, this same statement would ring as like, oh yeah, like that's not going to happen anytime soon. But right now, you're seeing people in the media, in government, kind of being like, what is going on? Like the AIs are already hacking their way out of their companies and then hacking into other companies, and maybe could have hacked into any company, given what we know about how good they've gotten at cyber defense, cyber offense. And so I really like, it's also notable that, Google DeepMind CEO Demis Hassabis, I don't think signed this letter. I don't think Google formally supported it. That's, a publicly traded company. Senior employees at Google did. But I think, OpenAI says that they paused training of new models, which is a huge deal because that's the way these companies work. Like they train bigger and better models all the time, and then they deploy them and they, keep advancing the frontier. And, Sam Altman said this. He's not known for his honesty. But if he were lying, it would like get out, I think, pretty clearly. So I think we're kind of in novel territory here. And yeah, I think that like you could see this as a way to moderate or milquetoast kind of demand. But given who it's coming from, I think, the US government, Congress, they listen to these companies, right? Like when they want to know what to do about AI, Chuck Schumer is like calling up Sam Altman and, talking to industry. And so if industry is like, hey, we need to have some kind of binding international rules, that's great. That's like a foot in the door. And then it's up to the rest of us who don't have these conflicts of interest to say, okay, and the rule should say, don't replace us. Don't let them build universal labor replacing machines. And the reason that's not happening is because people are not aware that that's what they're trying to do, or they don't think the industry might succeed, or they don't think that we can stop it. But I think it's becoming more and more clear that that's what they're gunning for. It might work and that we can and we should stop it.
That was Garrison Lovely speaking to me earlier today. We'll be putting out a longer version of that interview either tonight or tomorrow. And if you want an even longer interview with Garrison Lovely, Richard Hames, my colleague, did a book interview with Garrison on the Do Your Own Research podcast, which you can find, of course, on our YouTube. Aaron, thank you for joining me tonight.
My pleasure, Michael. Been a real pleasure. Great show.
That's been a good show. Enjoy. I'm just still sort of beaming from that comment that I hadn't pissed off that viewer yet. And apparently also they did like the AI story. So a full hour and 10 minutes without annoying you.
One more thing though. We're meant to be telling this week, I was told by Alex yesterday, we're meant to be saying to people, please subscribe to the channel.
Oh, please subscribe to the channel.
That's it. That
was it. Please subscribe to the channel. Please subscribe to the channel and support Novara Media. Novara.media/support. Thank you for tuning in. We're leaving. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.